to everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Peter West from Tangent 90. Tangent 90, if you don't know us, we've made a couple of products. One's called TrustTrack, which is for the distribution of copyright materials, e-prints for pharmaceutical research, for pharmaceutical marketing. And we have a product called Narrator, which is for bringing your content to life through narrating it through your iPad. So I'm here today to talk about the work that we're doing now with publishing companies, and particularly to let Simon Fry here talk to us about what Springer Healthcare are doing in their digital transformation journey. So Simon's come all the way from Manchester to join us this morning, which is fantastic. We might have got a slightly bigger crowd if I just put S. Fry. They might have thought it was Stephen Fry who was talking to us here. But Simon, Simon, tell us about your digital journey. How long have you been with Springer Healthcare?
Well, I am actually approaching a fairly auspicious anniversary. In about 8 days' time, I will have been with the company for 20 years. And I know I don't look old enough to have been in any company for 20 years, but you know that's reality. And I actually joined the business as a junior programmer, so I've got a very much technical background. Technology was always my focus. In the last 5 years, transitioned more over into product management and product development. And so, yeah, that's where I am now. 20 years coming up next week.
Fantastic. And tell us, how long ago did Springer's digital journey start?
Well, for us, it's been a really interesting journey because for those of you who don't really know Springer Healthcare, we are part of the Springer Nature company, the corporate publisher, and we deal exclusively with the pharmaceutical industry and essentially how we can take this vast content database and this vast content generation engine and utilize that to help customers in the pharma industry generate engagement with doctors. Absolute critical part of what they need to be able to do. And we do that in a variety of different ways. A lot of that is essentially reselling things like books, reselling clinical articles into sales channels for pharma. We also do bespoke content creation, web development, web publishing, live events. So there's a whole gamut of things that we get involved with. But really, we are founded in the scientific principles and integrity of a scientific publisher. And that's really what we try to bring to bear for our pharma customers. So we had obviously a very strong foothold in selling paper. Pharma sales reps walk into the door to visit a doctor and say, "Doctor, I really have to tell you about this clinical trial, which is going to be critical for your education, for how you can talk to your patients, and going to be hopefully really impactful." And that was a really strong, what they would call a detailing aid in the pharma sales and marketing industry. That door opener, that conversation enabler, something really relevant, something really credible that a doctor is going to pay attention to, but really a facilitator of a conversation. And we continue to do a lot of that business today. But of course, we're looking at our customers in the pharma industry who are looking at the shift to digital and figuring out where is their place in terms of how they can work in this ecosystem. So we wanted to figure out how our reprints going to go digital. So I was involved in this conversation 6 years ago. We actually looked at building our own platform. And it's a really difficult problem to solve because we're talking about trying to get engagement with people who are incredibly busy individuals in terms of seeing patients and trying to generate decent patient outcomes. Don't have a lot of time to spend on their own education, even though that's a critical part of what they do. How can we make sure that this experience is as friction-free as possible for a recipient of a clinical article? But at the same time, we're aware that publishers, and this isn't just Springer Nature, this is the publishing world as a whole, have got a huge vested interest in terms of ensuring they can continue to sell that content into this commercial detailing channel. So the problem is, how do we do something that looks like DRM? We don't really like to talk too much about DRM, but how can we make sure we're respecting the intellectual property rights of publishers at the same time as creating an experience for a doctor where he will be able to engage with that content and will get something meaningful from it. And it's actually a really tough challenge, and we spent a lot of time working on this problem. Came up with our own platforms, but I think there's a real sort of dynamic in the marketplace where we're not looking to create competitivity around essentially the doctor's reading experience. We want it just to be ubiquitous. We want it to be simple. We want it to be a channel through which pharma companies can use very high, credible, relevant scientific content to generate those educational outcomes and that engagement. And that's where our interest with TrustTrack and you guys came along, because we really saw something that we liked in the technology platform that you're putting together.
Sure. And we still hear from one or two people that no, people want paper. Do they really? Do millennials really want paper?
I am absolutely convinced at this point in time that there are lots of individuals out there who still want paper. And I mean, anecdotally, my own experience with this is I'm reading Niall Ferguson's latest book. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Niall Ferguson, historian. He's written a book called The Tower and the Square, about the competitivity of networks versus typical state hierarchies. Now, I've bought Niall's book in hardback. I've bought his Audible copy so I can listen to it in the car, and I also have the Kindle version so that I don't have to take this big piece of paper around with me. Now, I've paid 3 times for that piece of content, so I've given Niall a good 35, 40 quid of my cash. I don't mind doing it because the guy's an absolute superstar. I'm not going to do that with every single piece of content that I want to acquire. I make an exception. But if I want to be able to have that book by the side of the bed, the Kindle for the plane, and the audiobook for the car, right now, I have to go and buy all of those individual pieces of content. For our customers in the pharma industry, they really want to be focused on providing that kind of experience for their clinicians, to say there is no friction to whether you're on a plane, in the car, or in the clinic, that you can get access to this content. And if paper is a relevant channel to achieve that outcome, then that's something that we want to continue to support. So the vision is absolutely there. If you're familiar with pharma marketing, the idea of multi-channel, which has been around for a long, long time, and pharma really still trying to get this right now. How do you send a sales rep in there who understands what that doctor is interested in, has got the relevant content to engage with that clinician, to then provide him with a way where he can consume that content at the right time, in the right way, so that you've established a relationship, you've established a feedback mechanism, you've given that doctor something of relevance and value to him, which is what our customers really crave. So paper has an equal stakeholdership in that world. And it's another thing that we love about what TrustTrack does and what TrustTrack does for publishers who are getting content into this ecosystem, because we have the ability to support conference booth activity. When pharma are running symposia, you've got the ability for pharma sales reps who are out there using digital detailing technologies to be able to detail directly from their iPads using clinical journal articles. You've got integration into the pharma companies' websites, on their brand.com websites, where they have this requirement to be able to place all of the key literature which is supporting their scientific claims. The whole thing stitched up in one bag, one user interface, one user experience for the doctors. Absolutely critical thing. Don't make it difficult for the doctors or it won't work. And that's what TrustTrack has really kind of shown that it can give us, and why we're really keen to be involved in it.
Fantastic. And in this, what shall we say, this post-truth world, in this Trump world now, does that not play into your hands as a publisher? Because surely people are looking for that real scientific evidence to support claims, as against the marketing stuff.
I mean, I think it is a really interesting topic, and I'm guessing it's a topic that resonates with everybody. It does affect all of our lives. This is a completely new phenomenon if we look at, the US election or whatever it might be, in terms of who is the arbiter of truth. And I think if you look historically at our business as a global publisher, there's plenty of criticism that you can level at this idea of these walled gardens, these subscription services. There's plenty of criticism that you can level at the idea of open access, something new which has come along. But none of these things are actually perfect. But I think one thing that we can be really, really proud of, and I think is more relevant now than it ever has, is the concept of peer review, and what that actually gives you as a long-term trusted brand with a process which supports, as best as we can possibly do it, the fact that this content is an accurate reflection of the truth that we can all essentially go forward with in good faith. So I think peer review and big publishing brands have really kind of got a huge future in that regard, even though you can see all of this disruption coming from hundreds of different sources, and anybody can be a publisher on the internet. That's part of the problem and the beauty of the internet. So, I think I'm really emboldened by the problems that we see in mass mainstream media, and if we ever allow some of that thing to pollute what we're trying to do in science and in medicine, that could be really dangerous. So I think it's something that we're all very interested in watching and making sure that we can actually support what publishers are trying to do. We, as a reseller of content, we don't only sell Springer Nature content, we sell content which is produced by leading American societies. The American Society of Clinical Oncology are a partner of ours, where effectively we can help deliver their content into pharma marketing activities, because that is very valuable content as far as doctors are concerned. They trust us that we are going to represent that content appropriately, that we are going to make sure that they are remunerated for its use in the right way, and at the same time that we can help pharma companies externalize this content in as meaningful and impactful a way as possible. Because we all have to remember that our overall mission here is that we're trying to improve people's lives and save people's lives. So there is really nothing more important than we could be doing in terms of figuring out how to get this right.
So you're really benefiting from the fact that you're a trusted voice. You're a kind of BBC in the world of scientific research.
That would be really nice. Yes.
But in terms of pitfalls and problems of the digital journey, are there any sort of bits of advice that you give to people here if they're kind of doing it for themselves, what to avoid, where not to go?
I think the key thing is going back to core values of what it is that you're trying to achieve. And really, when I looked at this space, I guess maybe 10 years ago, I was maybe a little bit bored because it's a very conservative industry. Publishing is a fairly conservative industry. Pharma is even more conservative. And things don't really move particularly quick, and you can get a little bit tied down, med-legal review, all this kind of stuff. I was a little bit bored. And then one thing happened that really completely changed my worldview, and that was, this is ancient history now, but the Apple smartphone. A few things that were happening in my personal life at the time around access to medical education, things that were going on, and realizing that this convergence, social media, the internet, and mobile device technology was going to absolutely, completely transform how human beings would engage with their healthcare. And actually, pharma were pretty much on the outside of that trend, essentially regulated out of being able to participate in things like social media, and would likely have made a complete hash of it if they had tried. And some of these things that occurred right then really kind of hit me like a hammer, that this was really a new beginning in terms of how pharma would have to go about structuring their businesses, delivering their products in a way that is much more impactful than it had ever been before. And if you look at some of the global economic trends which have impacted that post-2008 and the financial crash, we're talking about governments who have got ever-diminishing resources. We're talking about aging populations of people living later in life, developing more diseases, more chronic long-term diseases, more debilitating diseases. We're looking at a scenario where medicine and the development of new medicines is becoming increasingly niche. You don't really have these big blockbuster drugs anymore, which is what the industry relied on for many years. More products, more complicated products. If you think about the challenge of trying to communicate all of this new complexity to a clinician audience who are already completely overwhelmed, it's an absolutely enormous challenge. And governments that are pretty much all broke and can't afford to fund their healthcare systems, the UK being probably the quintessential example of that, governments are saying to pharma, if you can't meaningfully demonstrate how your product is impacting a human in a meaningful, to generate a meaningful outcome or a quality of life improvement, we're not going to reimburse you for your products. So a real existential threat to the way that pharma went about that model of what products to develop, how to get them into the marketplace, and how to educate properly about their use so that they actually deliver some value. And that change is what has really kind of woke me up and made me think, actually, this is now incredibly exciting space, because we are talking about saving people's lives if we get this right. And so, for me personally, that was a kind of like a completely reinvigoration of everything that I'd ever really been involved with, and led to me to be stood here talking to you today.
Very good. No, and actually, to be honest, we at Tangent 90, we sort of feel as though we're part of that. We feel as though we're part of that mission to try and make sure we get reliable evidence out to healthcare professionals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, are there any questions from the audience about the digital journey? Philip.
So I'm interested. My full background is GlaxoSmithKline. So I was with GlaxoSmithKline for 7 years, buying digital content. GSK transitioned to digital online content, and I think it was 2003. Here we are in 2017, 14 years later, and the majority of reprints are still in printed form. I just wondered why you think that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was 2013 we really had our first initial launch of our platform for doing journal article reprint distribution. And it was that following year where I think Novartis at that time also announced that they were going 100% digital. It was a proper, we are going to embrace the future, this is the bold new world, off we go. But the reality of it goes back to what I said before, it's about meeting the expectations of your users. And at that point in time, we're still talking about generations of clinicians who didn't graduate with an iPhone in their hand, are really using technology as a secondary resource as opposed to a primary resource when they need to go and find out some information. So the audience still liked paper. Sales reps still liked paper because it's the easiest user interface in the world, a piece of paper. You can wave it in front of somebody's face as you're walking down the corridor. Oh, I need to spend 5 minutes with you. Do you get the same impact when you're waving your iPad? And what was quite an interesting phenomenon that occurred around that time is when the iPad really started taking off, sales reps were getting much more traction with clinicians simply because they had an iPad. And doctors were like, oh, iPad, I haven't seen one of those before. So suddenly, pharma like, oh my God, iPads, they're the future, and bought thousands and thousands of iPads from every sales rep. What they didn't really realise is it was just the latest hula hoop effect. Eventually, the doctors, yeah, I've seen an iPad before, right, let's get back to talking about data. And ultimately, that comes down to the preference of how they want to use it. And if they want to put it in their bag and take it home, or if they want to read it on plane, or whatever it's going to be, customers had to meet those expectations, and they've realised it. And we've seen this yo-yo, a kind of a ripple, where they've gone wholly digital, and then the year later, oh, actually, that didn't work. We're going now back to paper. Oh, we need some digital, and this kind of yo-yo that we've seen with a lot of our customers. And essentially, it's about finding the right balance. Personally, and I don't think paper is ever going to go away. I think what we probably will see in terms of technology is e-paper. So essentially, some generic placeholder that you still got all that utility of paper, that portability of paper, but the actual content could be completely dynamic. That's where we'll probably see paper die, because that will give you the best of both worlds. That'll be a really interesting one to see. That technology's been knocking around for donkey's years, and I've never really seen it actually working yet. So who knows what that will be. So I think we're still trying to find that sweet spot, and why we really advocate to our customers about make sure you meet the needs of your end user. That's all you need to focus on, and have that. We match our values to their values and to their processes. Build the technology that supports it. So I would love to see sales rep gives an e-print to a doctor, paper-based e-print. That's got an online access code. That even gives him a spoken word version if some genius ever finds a way to make clinical papers sound interesting through spoken word.
I'm sure we can do that.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can do that. Yeah. And like you, Simon, I'm a bit hybrid. Because every now and then I do like to print something out, but then I'll print it out, have a look at it, and then I'll put it in the bin. So am I right in thinking that with your licenses you can license people to have an e-print that they can print, or is that
not a go? Absolutely. This is really the kind of key business challenge that we've got, is how do we flex the model so that we can accommodate this new scenario of allowing customers to add value. I mean, we actually get a lot of pushback from pharma when we try to charge them the same price for an e-print to deliver to a doctor as we charge for the paper. And they say, surely it must be cheaper. It must be cheaper. It's the same price to do one as it is to do 100,000 of them. Surely it must be cheaper. And they fail to comprehend, I know we've got a few technologists in the audience, they fail to comprehend how many people you need to support that platform going forward. That is a huge challenge. It's a huge maintenance problem. You've got legacy support issues. It's much, much more complicated and costly to do digital than it is to do print. Of course, no customer wants you to turn around and say, actually, you know, it's more expensive, so you need to pay us more. So we're trying to figure out how do we really represent best value, which is a combination of print supported by digital or vice versa. And then we're not charging customers to have both at the same time. And again, I think there is a sweet spot there that we're probably still yet to find and we're kind of searching for.
I think as a fully digital company ourselves, I think I'd say that there are many advantages to the digital version because you can do the tracking and monitoring of the digital version, whereas the paper version, you never know where that went.
Yeah, and there is a blessing and a curse in that as well, because I think maybe a lot of customers were under the assumption that you can distribute a clinical article and every single doctor you give that paper to is going to read it and examine every single line and be completely up to scratch once they finish doing it. And the reality is that doesn't work. It is an engagement and an educational tactic that some people are going to resonate with. Some people are going to go, oh, I must read that, and never read it. In the paper world, that stuff either never made it into the hands of the doctor or it made it into the desk of the doctor and then straight into the bin at some point. There was no ROI, there was no feedback mechanism, and there was an assumption, I think, from customers that it was job done. The doctor received the paper, job done. But really, you were only just at the front door. You hadn't actually managed to have that educational experience with that clinician. You might have had an engagement, but not an experience. And that's why when digital came along and they looked at it, and some customers were like, well, only 5% of those doctors opened that ePrint. I'm like, yeah, 5% is actually pretty darn good.
That's good.
You know.
Yeah.
And it's actually created a whole new set of opportunities for us as well, because one thing that we do as part of our business is now we go in and train pharma sales rep teams how to get the best value out of this content. I mean, we know from our research and from other, even non-publishers, that doctors love clinical articles. And I think it goes back to this idea of it's peer review, very credible, highly educational. I think often the way that they're written is very impenetrable, but you know that's I think a different topic. But we know that doctors love article e-prints, but we think that we don't really provide them with the right experience about how they can engage with it. And there's something in there that we're really trying to figure out. Comes down to this idea of, is it because you're trying to force feed the doctor a specific itinerary of papers which meet your promotional and commercial agenda, whereas a doctor might basically just give me access to the New England Journal of Medicine, thanks very much. And you know, that's what they'd really like. And so we're trying to find that sweet spot, because we know they want this content, we know it generates engagement, we know it generates interest, but we probably aren't delivering it in quite the right way at this point in time. And that's something that I think we're going to solve.
Yeah, sure. And hopefully we can interest you in narrator to help provide narrated versions so that you can talk people through the interesting parts of the e-prints.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, we had ISMAP is a conference that you may be familiar with. It's essentially the Good Publication Practice Society meeting. We speak to doctors there who talk to us about clinical articles, and they say we love papers and we want them, but there's too much of them, we can't get through them all, we need to figure out a quicker way at being able to absorb this content, but still give us the ability to drill down. When we find something that we're really interested in, we want to go deep. And so that's where we've looked at all of these technologies and these strategies for how you can provide that summarization service. And that may be that it's the lead author, not just reading his abstract, which some of them do, which is just so boring and absolutely switch off, but actually talk in an engaging way about why they ran the study and why the study was impactful, to just generate that, okay, this sounds like there's something in there for me. So we've got all this work that we do with publication planning teams within pharma companies to talk about, don't think about just publishing your clinical data, which is of course extremely important, but think about what else you can be doing to make that content more engaging in that downstream activity where your sales and marketing organization are going to want to get something that doctors find meaningful, impactful, and engaging. So, and Narrator is a great tool, I think, for that. You know, we look forward to doing more with it.
Very good. Any more questions?
Do you use a specific platform to deliver your reprints to pharma, or do you use the same platform that Springer uses for the content in general?
Well, there's some Springer Nature people here, so I probably shouldn't be too derogatory about our platform, but it really wasn't developed with commercial sponsorship in mind, which is ultimately what we're looking for here. You know, this is how pharma can be engaged in delivering value to a doctor, improving their brand equity, their commitment to education in a space. That's really the level at which we want our customers to be able to pay us to be able to deliver this content to doctors for free. And SpringerLink isn't a great platform to do that. It does many things extremely well, but that really didn't quite suit our requirements. So we essentially went off and built our own. The other problem with that is we, Springer Healthcare as a business, we sell content from lots of societies and other publishers because we're really about creating solutions for pharma companies, their engagement and educational solutions. And we don't just limit ourselves to Springer Nature content. So it would be very difficult for us to do that under a Springer Nature branded platform. So that's why we essentially built our own. But going back to what I was saying earlier, we don't really want to create a huge diversification of platforms for doing digital content distribution for pharma, because it just confuses them, and it confuses doctors, and they've got different apps and all this sort of stuff, and that's, we're putting barriers in the way of simply getting the right content in front of the right doctor at the right time, which is why we're really kind of working hard with the guys from TrustTrack, because we think they've got some real strengths in terms of how they've approached building this and some of the things that they're doing in really innovative in terms of working with Viva, who are the world's leading closed-loop marketing digital detailing platform for pharma companies. So there's some really cool stuff in there. And so we'll continue to do our own thing because we've built it, but where we're looking at new innovative stuff, we're working with these guys. And there are other providers out there as well who've got neat platforms that do good things, that take account of intellectual property reuse and deliver meaningful experiences for doctors. And we want to be across all of that.
Any other quick questions? Fantastic. All right, I think we're about done for time anyway.
Yeah.
So Simon, thank you very much for coming down to see us.